Shalom and good evening to all of you. I'll speak English. It's very strange to speak English in Jerusalem. And if you can just lower a little the lights, I'm willing to confess everything without this torment. Okay? Thank you. Yes. Okay. Oh, now we see you. Yeah. Nicole, one thing that I discovered about you very lately is that you started your writing career as a poet, actually, not as a writer, not as a fiction or prose writer. And I wondered, first, how did it start? And second, what made you change and move to writing prose?
From the time that I was, I guess, about 14, I wanted to be a writer, but I really wanted to be a poet. And I never tried writing stories. I read a lot of fiction, but for me, poetry was kind of the goal of the language. It was the highest, most noble aspiration for the language, and it went directly to the source somehow. And so I think until the age of about 25, so 10 years of really just reading poetry, wanting to write poetry, and imagining that maybe one day I would become a poet. And then at a certain point, I had finished university, I had finished graduate school, and the time had come to actually try to be a writer or, jump off the ship and do something else. And it coincided with a time in my writing when I felt just completely blocked. Somehow, all of the reason for writing in the first place, the sense of liberation, the sense of being able to become something or say something that you can't be or say in life, I just completely lost it, and the poems were getting smaller and smaller. And to some degree, I was under the instruction, so to speak, of a great poet, of Joseph Brodsky. But his point was always that you had to sort of, if you were going to write in free verse, you had to know what you were being free from. So there was this insistence on writing formal verse. Somehow the poems were I was trapped in them. And so I thought, just as a way to punch a hole in the wall, that I would try to write a little bit of prose, just to come back to the poet, just to see what would happen. So I sat down. I had no idea how you went about doing something like that, so I thought that you had to have an idea. Little did I know that having an idea is the worst possible thing you can have as a novelist. But I thought you had an idea, so I thought of an idea, and I started to write a book. And I think what I found is that now I can speak of it in these terms, but that somehow, for me, a poem, the word stanza in Italian means room. And I think that there's I had a sense that a poem, like a room, could be arranged to the point where it could be perfect, that it aspired to perfection, and that if you wrote it well enough, it could be perfect. And then, of course, there's that thing that W.H. Auden said, which is the moment after you write the poem, you never know whether you'll write one ever again. And unlike poems, novels never can be perfect. They are by nature imperfect. I mean, I think when people ask us to describe or to define the form, all we can say is it's a long story with beginning and end, and it's imperfect. It's flawed. It's a flawed work. And I think that something about that set me free, gave me that freedom that I was looking for, the sense that, like all of us who live in houses, there's always something broken. There's always something that doesn't work. And I just simply felt at home. I felt at home in the novel in a way that it's possible I never felt at home in poetry. And so I never went back. And I always say, when I'm old and wise, I will write poetry again. But so far, I've gotten older and maybe a touch wiser, but no poetry so far. I actually want to ask you something similar, because we were speaking a little bit before. Actually, we have spoken before in public, and when I was going over my old questions to you, and I can't remember which I asked and which I didn't, but at the time, one of the questions I asked, and this is now 4 years ago, was, do you ever feel limited by the novel? Do you ever wish to escape the form into some other form? And then, of course, this book, your most recent book in English, came along, Falling Out of Time. And you did escape the form, and you escaped into something that is at times poetry, but not only poetry. And I wondered for you why you chose that form for this book.
Unlike you, I started as a prose writer, and I never thought of myself as a poet. And even today, I do not think of myself as a poet. But this book, נופל מחוץ לזמן in Hebrew and falling out of time in English, was written after we have lost our son Uri in the war almost 8 years ago. And I knew that I want to write about that I need to write about that. I mean, this is the major fact of my life, and how can I not write about it? Especially since I felt that there are no words to talk about something like that. Either people say we are speechless, or they talk in cliches about that. About every extreme situation, I think we tend to speak in cliches or to say we are speechless. Situations of enormous pleasure or enormous pain. Listen to that. That's very impressive.
I think that's what you do when you can't write a novel.
Yeah. And I felt, at first you feel that you just don't want to say anything. Yes, words are not enough. And then after a while, because we are human, we need to articulate. We need to have a more nuanced language in order to touch this reality, this new reality in a more nuanced and delicate way. And I guess that the form of the poems in this book are a kind of a compromise between two tendencies, and it reflects the tension between I shall never be able to write it, I must write it, how could I have written it? And this what brought about the form of poetry. Also, I think, poetry is maybe the closest art to silence, the closest to silence. And again, this tension between being silent and say things about that. And the strange thing was that immediately when I started writing poems, I felt that this is my place, that this is how I should write, and there's something so refined in poetry. And as you said, in a novel is a clumsy thing, really, it's heavy. You cannot move it very easily, because after a while everything is connected to so many other facts, and if you change one detail, you have to change hundreds of details all the way. And in novels they tend to be more linear, even though we know about many novels, and some of them we have written, both of us, that are not linear. And yet there is something so precise in poetry that I thought that I will never be able to go back to writing prose, actually. And then I started writing prose, and I discovered the pleasures of writing prose, the fact that you have characters and so many things are happening, and anecdotes, and the special language of every character. Yeah.
And that made me think of a couple of things. One is that, when one is writing poetry, there's always an awareness of the breath, how much breath you have to take you to the end of the line before you choke. And actually the best lines of poetry, I think you do choke at the end. You get just to the last bit of air. And I felt that in Falling Out of Time, there was a sense in which the characters, the voices were always on the edge of choking, that something was being choked back even as they were being propelled forward into the necessity for the next breath or the next stab at saying what needed to be said.
They are choking, and yet they are more choked by silence. Mm. Each of the characters did not speak about his loss or her loss for years. And they they feel the need and they don't know how to express it. So first they start to walk. The walking man, the main character, he starts to walk. First he encircles himself, then the little hut where they live, and then the big city nearby. And he walks on the top of the hills. And by his walk, by his creating this movement, he's able to liberate people who experience the same loss, and he's able to attract them from their life and to magnet them into him, and they start walking, and only when they start walking and moving, they start talking. You know, the motion brings emotions in a way. And I think it's, you know, when something like that happens, such a catastrophe, there is a tend to fossilize, to remain paralyzed almost by what has happened. Not only the dead one is paralyzed, but also the people around him. And there was such a need that I felt, you know, to defy it, to be able to move again, not to be stuck in the place where catastrophe has put me, not to be defined by catastrophe, but to find my own words that will allow me again to feel alive and to feel the liberty of moving. I say it, and I think about some of your characters, both in the history of love and the Beit Gadol in Hebrew. And there is something that I trace through most of your characters, and it's a kind of a subcurrent of feeling that says that we, human beings, we contain such an explosive power. We can be so destructive to others, even to our beloved ones, that we must keep a distance. We must, you know, allow the other to be the other. And as if there is an avoidance of really touching the other. Now, miraculously, your books does not create a sense of detachment, not at all. This space that is kept between individuals, between parents and children, between husband and wife, between friends, this space is full, is really boiling with all the options that have not been carried out, that have not been explored.
It's interesting that you say that, because especially in Great House, I felt very much that the characters in that book were each in their own way confronting something incredibly difficult. It may be the case that they were not always confronting someone else directly, but the book came out of a desire for an almost confessional desire. And I remember thinking of this act of confession. I've been thinking a lot about, before the first line of the book became Your Honor, I already had the idea that somehow being in front of a judge, but of course that judge being in some way ourselves, or the one who we have wronged in some way. And I think I'm attracted to the idea of a character being forced up against his or herself and becoming of really stripping down to the bone. Not in order to make things hard. I had a lot of readers who said it was a difficult book or it was hard. It isn't my intention to put the reader or myself or the characters through difficult things for the sake of simply hardship, but of course for the possibility of transcending that. And so the book felt to me like a kind of, that I was flaying the skin of these characters. I was flaying my own skin in the process of writing it. I think if there's I know what you're saying about a kind of maybe delicacy about the interactions between other people. I had a friend who once said to me, there's never three people talking in your books. Occasionally there's two people talking to each other. Mostly it's just one person alone. And I don't know what that says. And what fascinates me is what happens between people, of course. And I hope that that's what I'm writing about. But I think there's some way in which you can't have as your occupation something that requires you to endlessly get into the life of another person, to embody his pains and his struggles and his happiness and not feel constantly that if you say something or if you put him up against somebody else, he could be heard, that he could be heard. And so you also become, you protect a space for him somehow, or her, in which something naked can happen, in which the struggle can be confronted, but so it's not in a way that's overly destructive. But I don't know, I mean, it's not something that anyone else ever pointed out to me at work, and now I guess I'll be more conscious of it, I don't know. Well, I have to see. So I want also to ask you about what you said about getting rid, this sense that after you finished Falling Out of Time, you felt it would be hard to return to story and to narrative and to character in a kind of traditional sense. It's actually something that I find very frustrating at the beginning of every book, the sense of that I don't want the artifice of that I feel almost that I'm being put upon by having to tell a story, that what I want is exactly what you managed to do in that book, which I rarely find anywhere, which is just simply touch the essence of the thing that the moment when the book opens and the man who becomes the Walkman gets up from the table and the knives and the forks clatter to the floor, and this is the moment in life that I think that every writer knows, and in a certain sense the moment when simply just living life, experiencing it and feeling it isn't enough. It's reached a tipping point, and something has to be done about it. You need to search for language. There needs to be an articulation to some degree. Something needs to be made out of it. So for me, there's a sense of always that is what the work is about, of simply trying to touch that essence. And you use characters almost like an asbestos glove to get there, because it's sometimes too direct, you want to come at it from an oblique way. And having to make up scenes and having to drag oneself through a plot, all of that, at least at the outset of the novel, before it takes on a life of its own and becomes something that you have faith in because it's so real and it has its own momentum. It's something I find frustrating still to this day as a novelist, and it's something that I often want to get rid of. I want to reinvent the form so that I can only... So I wonder how it felt to return to that, or maybe to speak a little bit about the joys of what it is to create a character and to live with a character and to tell the story. Because it's something, it's something that is so much at the heart of your work.
First, I like to try at least to invent something new in every book. I do not always succeed, and sometimes I start creating something or inventing something, and then I see it doesn't work. But I believe that a writer or every artist has to have this kind of hubris, the idea that he or she can reinvent the wheel anew from the beginning. Without that, you cannot really become an artist. If you don't have this need to generate something new in reality, or to juxtapose things in a way that have never been tried before, so go do other things. Don't be a writer or a musician or a movie person. And also another thing that I think of is that the book should be inevitable. That you have to write this book because your life depends on writing or not writing it. I know it sounds very extreme, but sometimes it is true, it is true in the sense that I cannot find a place for me in the world unless I write this specific book. Not always I know what this book will be about. Sometimes it takes me months to discover where I am going to, where this story takes me, where these characters take me. But I need to feel this urgency, which I must say, and it's such a pleasure to tell you that I feel it so deeply in all your books. All your books, I feel this urgency, this need of you to tell the story, and of each and every character in the book to tell their story. You asked about creating a character. And this is, again, another major joy in the joys of writing. Usually we are so limited in our life. I mean, after a certain age, we start to narrow down and to congeal in one storyline, one life, one body, one language, one or two, but mainly one language, one environment, one state. You know, we are limited, and we start to adjust to this limitation, and even to collaborate with it. It gives us a sense of confidence and predictability. Now, when I write, and I know also when you write, we have this pleasure of melting to so many other options that are inside us. Now, usually we also tend to define ourselves against others. People will say, we shall never be like our parents. Yes? Not you, your parents are here, so present company excluded. Yeah. Israelis will say, we shall never be like the Palestinians. And I discovered that it's on the contrary. If I allow myself to be invaded by other characters, by other options of myself, if I allow myself to move freely on this line, you know, I think in To the End of the Land, there is this character, Ora, who is a woman. And I was often asked, how did you write a woman? I said, you know, none of us is only man or only woman, yes? We shift, we move on this line. And those who are only this or that, well, frankly, I pity them. That they do not have the ability to explore the various options. None of us is only old or only a child. None of us is neither sane or insane, yes? We have all the options, and when you write, you allow yourself to, as I said, to melt or to stare all those options inside you and to become other options. And it's so liberating. And I think we know when we read a good book, when we feel this inner liberation of the writer, we feel I mean, it can be the most serious book, like Beit Gadol, but you feel there that you really enjoyed being all these different characters.
But I think it's also what happens ideally in the reader. It's certainly what happens to me as a reader, and it's why I got hooked on books at such a young age, that I felt growing up I had only one life, and that life was limited. I could only go so far. I didn't have a car. I couldn't drive. I couldn't meet other people. And in books, I could meet the world, but I could also become larger. And I think what you're describing, this expansion, it begins in us at a very young age as a reader, and we realize that through language and through writing, we can multiply ourselves, that there is this incredibly sad choice of having to choose one life and having to commit to that life, which is what we have to do. I mean, you can't simply wake up every day and be a different person. In a way, you owe it to your loved ones to be something familiar, to be what you were before you went to bed the night before. And I think there's something comforting in that. There's also something difficult in that. There's something in us that wants to overthrow that and wants endlessly to expand the possibilities of life. And of course, you know, when you write, on the one hand, it can seem like a safe place to do it. Certainly when you read, I think it's a safe way to do it. But I actually want to talk about, in some sense, the danger of it, because we're talking a lot about melting into other characters or expanding, but also there's a way in which, in order to do that, you also have to, and I've heard you talk about sport, and you have to dismantle yourself. There's this part of the process that can be where you rigorously have to take yourself apart in order to allow yourself these other options and allow yourself to become a woman. I mean, it's something I think about each of us. I recently gave part of my new book to someone to read, and she laughed. She said, really another old man? Another old man?
You know, you learn about yourself and about the world through writing. And part of it is this dismantling of the self, yes, taking bits and pieces from your own character, from your own biography, your own options, and to combine them together in a way that has never been tried before. Also, you know, even from the very physical point of view, when I create a new character, I must feel this character physically. I must know how does it feel to be him or her or this dog or whatever. You know, what does it mean to move like a dog in the world? And I tried. Of course I tried. I mean, where would I get the chance to be a dog or whatever? Yes, so I really tried to move, and I understand so many things through the body. Because really, so much information is kept within our bodily cells, and the ability to liberate them, to let them free, surface all kind of thoughts, emotions, ideas that would have never surfaced otherwise. It's, you know, I told you just before when we sat here, I was asked some weeks ago a question that was taken from psychoanalysis. There was a very famous psychoanalyst, Wilfried Bion, and he had this concept about the memory of the future, the memory of the future. And I thought this is something we are doing when we write. We try to remember the future. Now, it's very delicate thing, you know, because how can we remember something that never has happened? Never in real life was someone like your Gorsky in the history of love who became a naked model for painters. Never, but somehow when you wrote it, you as if remembered something that has never occurred, and you made it true.
And you told me the idea, and it's a very, very beautiful idea, because I think we spend so much time. Last night I had a conversation with Yehoshua, and we spent a lot of time talking about...
You are meeting with Yehoshua as well.
Yeah. You're a lot more easygoing than he was. We spent an enormous amount of time actually talking about the past and talking about the way in which the past comes down through us and the way that we deal with the burden of the past, and do we overthrow the burden of the past, do we come free? I think it's actually a very beautiful way of thinking about writing, to think of it as a memory of the future. I don't know exactly what it means, and I need time to think about that.
But it sounds good, isn't it?
It sounds so good. But what I wanted to say is interesting about listening to you talk about how you become your characters. It's different for me. I never feel them physically, never. And in fact, if you ask me, what does Leo Gursky look like? I have no idea. To this day, I have no idea. Once I thought I saw him in the park, but it was because of what he was doing physically. This old man, a week after I finished the book, I saw this old man in Prospect Park, and he was just alone. He had his shirt off, and he was doing these crazy exercises, and I thought, he's saying goodbye to me. You know, my character's saying goodbye, but not because I recognize his face. And I never see the characters that I write from the outside, ever. And when I get to know them, now of course this happens to you, of course, but it happens in the language. It always happens in the language. So for example, with Leo, there was this moment when I had a long sentence, and it began with, and yet, da, 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 da. And then just as a kind of instinct, I thought, what if I just move the period from the end of the sentence to after this phrase, and yet, period. And suddenly, it was like the mortal breath was blown into him, because it captured in these two words all of the desire to say something, all the sense of having arrived at the moment in the kitchen table where you need to stand up and the fork and the knife clatter the floor, and yet, but what? What can you say? And in his case, the inability to say so much, so the desire to say it, and then also the silence, the enormous silence that he was trailing around with him, and the loneliness. And somehow in that shift, I mean, now I'm not even talking about language, I'm talking about punctuation. In the shift of a period, a character came to life for me. And I think that for me, this is where the good stuff happens. I mean, this is where the character becomes hot, becomes alive, and starts to breathe for me. I never feel that they are with me in the room, or that I see them moving, or they never interrupt my dreams, or that I feel the work of making them. I feel I know them so well, and at some point they are dictating themselves. They become to some degree, inevitable in the way, I mean, maybe this is where the memory of the future come in, because they could only have that story eventually after all of the work is done. But I don't go at it in the same way. I sometimes feel you get to know your characters a little bit better somehow.
No, I don't think you don't know your characters. You know them very well.
No, but you at least you know what they look like. You get it. You actually walk around like them.
I need to know it. I really need to know their physicality, and to feel it, and how they walk and how they talk, and how their voice sound, and how curly is their hair, and how they make love, and how they eat everything. I just need to know it. It's such an opportunity to.
Do you think to some degree you know it, but when the reader comes to your book, she brings a different voice and she brings a different way of moving to the character?
I'm so sure that almost most of my intentions are being changed while writing, and that the reader reads what he or she wants to read. More than that, I'll tell you, I think that no matter how the writer is aware of his work, the heart of the work somehow, in a strange way, always stands in a kind of a blind spot of the writer himself. He does not really know everything. Thank God, I will say, in this context, yes. The writer really does not know all the implications and all the echoes that his writing creates. How could he? How could he or she? Yeah,
I think actually it's something that's so critical to writing, is to leave the spaces to breathe, where the reader injects herself. And it's happened to me on so many occasions where somebody, a friend who's read the work, or sometimes a reader that I meet at something like this, will come to me and say, I loved that scene, it was so evocative. And when you go back and look at the scene, it's totally skeletal. There's nothing there. There's some lamp lit in the corner of a room or some color of the sky. But the reader comes and she furnishes this scene with her imagination and her memory and her sense of what her father's voice sounded like, her sense of the wind, her sense of the... And I think it's this, sometimes a mistake that I find that when I can't find my way into a book, I feel it's the mistake of the writer that he didn't leave or she didn't leave enough space for me to put myself into it, or that there's too much resolution. I mean, it happens too, not just with description and not just with character, but it happens in the shape of the book itself. I think this sense of allowing is so hard as the author of the book, but to allow your characters, to allow the story to sit in this kind of solution of uncertainty, and not to push it, not to push the resolution, not to insist on the answers, but just to allow the question, to allow the reader to ask the question, to give her a space to ask the question.
And I think that the way you do it is really, for me, it's unique, because in every paragraph that you write, it ends, it's written with very, precision and accuracy, and yet the ending of almost every paragraph is opened. Things can happen. And I, as a reader, I am able to float with all the options that you suggest to me. Suggest not in an aggressive way, but somehow in the way that you write, which sometimes it's like a sleepwalker. You write like a sleepwalker.
It doesn't feel like that.
Nobody
it's
told
hard
you
work.
That. No, but you write, and there is this air of fantasy and also a slight melody of elegy behind everything, and that allows me as a reader really to take off, and this is why I guess you get so many different interpretations of what you have written.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea of elegy, but I think it's always been a tone that has attracted me. I think it's a lot of the characters I've written, there's either an elegiacal tone, or they are people who are facing their own demise or facing their own death. And I think there's something about that perspective which throws everything into relief. It's not so much the facing of one's own death that interests me, because in the end it's not much one can say about that, but it's something about how it throws the life into relief and suddenly gives this opportunity, as we were talking about before, to touch the most essential things in life, the things that that we as novelists have the luxury to touch on a daily basis, to be in contact with these existential things, which everything else in life has a habit of somehow obscuring to some degree. Yeah.
I walked with you from the restaurant till here, and people came and talked to you, and I feel that you are very, very beloved here. And I asked myself, how had you been, how you would have been had you been an Israeli? I mean, what kind of writer you would have been had you been an Israeli?
It's something I think about a lot, because I have a lot of things to say about. One is that I envy you. I really, really envy you, because I think you have at your fingertips a whole country that is yours. It's completely yours, and you know it inside out. You know what people sound like, and they're your people, and you know what is behind each comment. You can imagine the story before it's even said. You can see how a woman walks, and you can know something about her life, and the language, everything is really yours, and you have an authority. It gives you an authority, and also you have material falling from the sky all around you. Whereas, for me, I mean, I'm an American writer, and what does it mean to be an American writer? I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. What is America as a subject? You can't even begin to get even a corner of it into your viewfinder. It's so big and it's so various, and it's not mine. It could never be mine. I don't know that it can never be anybody's, frankly. I don't know that any American writer has had as his or her subject America only. They've had a pocket. They have a pocket of America. They have a corner of America. They have some angle on it, but not the whole thing. And I think that somehow I'm at a disadvantage, and there are times when I feel I'm at sea. I mean, I'm sort of without a country to some degree. On the other hand, I think, had I been born into Hebrew, I have no illusions about the gift of being born into English, what it means to be born into English. Not just because I love the language. I'm sure I would have loved Hebrew if I were born into it, but because of the chance it gave me to become a writer who can have a living and who can travel the world and can be invited to speak to you here tonight. I think I know enough young Israeli writers to know what a wall they're up against and just how hard it is, not on the first level, simply to make a life as a writer. And the next level, to make a life beyond Israel, I mean, to be translated and to go beyond that. I mean, you're in a rare and lucky position as an Israeli writer, but it's something that I think is a huge role. I have no idea would I have even had the chance to become a writer if I had been born here. So I guess in the end, I'm glad, despite not having what I described, what I think you're lucky to have. I think it worked for me. And also I feel there is some gift I think I've managed to find in being in the rootlessness of being able to go many places, and to, because my family comes from a lot of places, I think I feel at home in a lot, or I know how to make a home out of a lot of places, or to put them together in a way that creates a sense of home in the novel. Is
Israel also a home? Because you write so often about Israel.
I feel it's one strand. It's one important strand for me. And my work somehow continues to return here for all kinds of reasons. Some still mysterious to me. I hope they stay mysterious. Having mysterious reasons for why one does what one does in one's work, I think is actually kind of helpful. It's sometimes having to answer all these questions about our work is, I think, not always a good thing. Sometimes being led simply by instinct, and my instinct brings me here. So what about you? Can you imagine yourself having been an American writer, a writer anything but an Israeli writer?
Very hard for me. I never even lived out of Israel for more than 3 weeks. And yeah, I'm really addicted to the acid here. There is something in what happens here, the intensity of all the contradictions. Part of them we witnessed just some moments ago with these demonstrations against the visit of the Pope, which I think really reflects the kind of deep narrow-mindedness that Judaism falls into these days because of this mixture of nationalism and religion, which corners us in one of the most dark corners of us as a people, as a culture, as a religion as well. But it's also part of a very intense and enhanced mosaic that I really love. I mean, I love and I hate, but I love to hate it. Or it's a makom, you know. Israel is a place, is a makom for me. I always felt that one of the definitions that I thought of for a Jew, both as an individual and as a people, is of someone who never really felt at home in the world, never really, you know, to the deepest layers of his being, not even in the most hospitable place. Always there was this, you know, the dotted line being able to be torn immediately, you know, like the Jews in Ethiopia that in one night were uprooted and came here, or like a million of Jews from the Soviet Union, or the Exodus, the real Exodus of the Jews from Egypt in the Bible. And Israel, I feel, should be this home. I mean, this is the whole purpose of it, after all. That it should be a home, a place that we are connected and that is relevant for us. You know, I think this is the word that I was looking for. Even the things that I hate, like these rageful shouts back there, are relevant for me. I know where they come from. I know the sentiment that brought them up here. I know that in a certain different juxtaposition of genes or biography, I could have been there, shouting there. It's not totally alienated from me. And I want to live in a relevant place. I want to live in a place that I can still decode. I cannot tell you that I can decode them. But I think that I have the instruments to decode them. I'm able, you know, to read the Bible and to read the Talmud, and I'm able to, I mean, this is part of reality that if I'll do an effort, I might, I'm not sure, understand them. If I had to leave now, to leave Israel and to live in the United States, I will be totally paralyzed. I wouldn't be able to decode and to understand. And even the most beautiful things will not be relevant for me in this deep way that I can feel here. I once heard Carlo Ginzburg saying, the historian, he said, "A homeland is the land I feel ashamed for." Now, it's very catching. I would also add, I also can feel proud for. Yes, not only shame. But of course, it touches you in this fragile place where everybody knows you and everybody understands you and can decode you and expose you in a way. And in that sense, Israel is not only a state, it's also a family.
What you're saying reminds me of kind of the fact that you also share with your readers a kind of private language, which I also envy. I remember many years ago when the Polish director Krzysztof Kieslowski was still alive, I heard him speak. And he described how, before the fall of communism, he loved to make films because he felt that in his films there were so many things that were encoded, and that he was speaking in a private language to those who came to watch his films. And after the fall of communism, he no longer felt the urge to make films because this private language was public. It was no longer necessary. And I think there's something wonderful about that. It gives you also a certain kind of power as a writer and an intensity of your connection with your readers. I guess, though, what I also point out, there is a tremendous loneliness also in your work. I feel somehow that in you as a person, when I read your interviews, it's just a subject you return to, and I also feel it in your work that of course the writing is a response to the loneliness, and your writing is always about a kind of effort to get closer and to tear away boundaries that are between people. But at the same time, what you're talking about having this home, and yet it seems to me your work is also very much about a creation of a home that you don't find in life. Maybe we're talking about something more existential rather than something material, rather than the sound of voices or characters or people or politics. But it seems to me that you have both of those forces working at the same time, one which is more familiar in a certain sense in the diaspora, which is this sense of the need to create a sense of where one belongs, because it's not in the things around you, and yet you have it in the things around you, but it also feels part of what propels you as a writer, unless I'm wrong.
No, you said to belong, and I thought it's a word in English that consists of two words, to be and to long. So probably this is what I feel, a kind of a built-in outsider. But I think this is the permanent position of the artist, of every artist. You know, I think in Be My Knife, I thought of the man who stands there, and he is with his wife in the kitchen with their child, and the kitchen is warm and full of the smells of home and of, you know, love and caring and all this wonderful creation of a family. And all the time he is there, he's totally there, but all the time he stands out of the window as if he stands. Look who's talking about loneliness. I mean, all your loneliness is your character's middle name, so to say, yes?
Ralph to read, and he said, I don't know the title. So I said, so you think of a title for it. So he thought about it, called me back, and he said, Longing. I said, you're kidding, that's the name of the body of my work, not the story. You know, like, why give it all away in one go? And I think that, look, when there are certain positions that regret is another one, yearning, where you can get at things that you can't get at in any other way. And I think sometimes when I put the character, it's not conscious, but when I'm drawn to somebody who is full of regret, for example, the Israeli father in Great House, when I have somebody like that when the moment you meet him, he's full of regret, I have a chance to really get at something very, very deep in him. It's very easy to get him to sort of expose himself, and also for the reader to somehow who doesn't feel regret, you know. And so I think there are certain positions which I go back to again and again. But I'd say we're talking a lot about things that are difficult, about things that are really painful. But I also thought maybe we should say something about joy and about pleasure, because I found in the last years of trying to write that one of my projects has been finding the pleasure in it. I mean, I don't think I ever lost it, but I think that's where I started. I think that's where it began for me, was with, many things, wanting to express myself, wanting to create myself in the way that we described, that making characters, and we expand ourselves. I wanted to make myself as a young person, and somehow instinctively understood that I could do it in writing. But I also did it because it gave me joy, because it just gave me enormous pleasure. And it's something that I think in the professionalization of when you become a professional writer, many other things happen. You have all kinds of ambitions, and you want the work to be different, original. We talked about wanting to change all the time. And so many things come into the picture, but somehow, to me, the importance of simply the joy that it can bring us and that it can bring readers, somehow it came to the forefront for me again. And I know in your last book, I don't know, it certainly wasn't about joy, but I wonder whether it's something that you think about or something that's still instinctive to you in your work, or whether you have to fight for it sometimes.
First of all, you are very right. I mean, there is enormous joy in writing, in imagining and inventing characters. And I wake up every morning full of excitement, you know, because I know I'm going to spend such and such hours, I'll not say how many, in fantasizing, in trying...
How many hours?
I will not tell you, I know. And I will play like a child playing. I will solve so many riddles. And it's not only to solve a riddle. The solution should fit to thousands of other solutions in the same book. And I will allow myself to go astray and to get lost and to be unprotected in a way that in my life I will never dare to do. This allows me to do all these things. And the pleasure of totality, you know, in most things that we do in life, we are not total creatures. I'm sorry to disappoint you. We are doing them even when we are fully devoted. We are doing them partly, and there are others who will cover for us and will do this or that for us. But when you write a story, you must be there with capital B. And yes, you must prevail in all the layers of reality, from the lowest to the most lofty and abstract. But you have to be there totally. And there is such a sweetness to this totality that I do not know it from any other place. You ask if this can console also the writing, the act of writing. No, I don't think, you know, that writing Falling Out of Time has consoled me. But I feel that I did right to write it, that I needed to put myself there, because this is my way to understand what happens to me in my life. This has always been the way for me to understand my life. I know that so many things, important, major things in my life, I will never understand, because life is so short and I will not be able to write about all of them. But exactly as I wanted to write about the Shoah, or about the way our soul, our living sparkle has to adjust to the carnal dimension of the body, or as I wrote about the situation between us and the Palestinians, the occupation, or many other things, I understood them only when I wrote about them, and mainly when I wrote about them in the form of a story, of a novel. Documentary is not satisfactory enough for me. I really need to take this reality and to break it and to split between different people, different points of view. And this I can achieve only through a novel. And it never really, you know, once when Sea Under Love was published in Germany, I came for the first time to be there. I didn't dare to come to Germany before I had my name on a book. I know it sounds very presumptuous, but I felt that to a place where people were killed anonymously as numbers tattooed and not names, I want to have my name on a book there. Only then I'll be able to come. And then the driver who took me from the airport, he started to ask me, what are you doing? And then I said, the writer, what did you write about? I said, about the Shoah, the Holocaust. And he said, well, now, he was an American who lived in Germany. And he said, and now when you wrote about it, did you get it out of your system? So he said, so I don't want to get things out of my system, and I don't believe in that, actually. But I believe in writing as a way to be more in life, in my life, yes, to expose myself to everything that life can be.
There's something so ironic about it, which is that one has to remove oneself from life in order to be more in your life. And then I think it's something, again, I thought of when I was reading Falling Out of Time, because again I was describing this moment that I think is also the moment of the writer's revelation, where you simply have to get up from the table and leave the comfort of the kitchen, leave the place where life happens, to go away from life and to close yourself up in order to more fully live it. And I don't know, I think for me, writing has always been a form of consolation. It's a consolation for the fact that after I leave every conversation, I never got it right. And I always am rewriting the conversation in my head. And you know, it is messy and it doesn't have coherence. And what we want desperately, I think, as people, is to have coherence. I think it's, you know, we want to tell ourselves the story of who we are. It gives us tremendous comfort, and we're always struggling to do it in life. And you know, I think in the work we have a chance to do that somehow. I mean, you talk about the idea of, you know, of metaphor somehow. I mean, I always think of metaphors like the basic unit of literature. What is a metaphor? It's taking two things which have no relationship to each other. They don't belong together. And somehow you find a communion between them. And in the act of bringing them together, you create the sense in yourself as the writer and in the reader of this kind of sense of unity that somehow is flowing underneath everything, that we sense is there, that we want desperately to be there. But it's hard to find in life, but it's what we're doing on a daily basis, is creating this kind of coherence. And I find that deeply consoling. And even if it is the case that, I think it was Borges said that, you know, writing is, literature is a parallel universe, but it's a counterfeit universe. And it isn't to some degree counterfeit, but it's a counterfeit world that sends back authenticity to the world that we live in. And I think that is the consolation. Even if the characters in our books don't actually walk around and they couldn't live in this world, they wouldn't survive because they're not people. They don't live by the same laws. They live by the laws that we make for them in the novels. They are real in those terms, and they send back news of art. They send back authenticity to us. And I think that is somehow the consolation at the heart of it for me.
I remember in Beit Gadol there is the character, I think it's of Nadia, of Lotte, and she, correct me if I'm wrong, it's Lotte or Nadia, and she says that writing covers for all kind of inabilities in her life. That she really escapes life through writing and through creating to herself this hermetic bubble. Is it something that you also feel?
I feel that I'm always in trying to get this balance right between a real hunger for life, a desire to live life in the fullest possible way, and at the same time this realization that most of the living I'm doing is in this other realm. And I don't know, it's still the life it's without question the life I would choose. I feel incredibly lucky. Every day I go to work, I ride the subway because I go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, so I'm going against the traffic. But I go and I have a place to write there, and I look around me at everybody else, and my first instinct is absolute jealousy that they're going to work and they have a job to do and they know what their job is to do and they have people to talk to, and that it's all seems very clear, cut and clear, and for a moment or for sometimes the whole, I want to be them because I'm excited to go to work too, but it's hard. But at the end of the day, you talked about this a little bit too, with the last book, the difficulty of starting and the impossibility of leaving. And at the end of the day, if you were lucky enough to get into it, it really feels like the luckiest job in the world to have these lives, to touch these things which don't normally get to be touched. And in some deep way, to have this conversation with people that you're present for, but goes on afterwards. The conversation keeps being had even when you're finished. I ask you if you remember your books, and you said you remember part. I bet you that people in this room know them better than you do. The conversation continues without you.
Yeah, I'm sure, because when I write them, I know them almost by heart. Also because I have this very strange and non-economic way of writing. Do you hear me? Because I write and rewrite many versions. It's my way of of understanding what I'm writing. It doesn't happen to me at first sight. I write a paragraph, then I have to rewrite it until I think I understand it. When I write, so then I think I know by heart what you give me the beginning of a sentence, I know how it ends. And then I move to another reality, which is quite difficult to end the book, is another major topic. Where do you know how to end a book? I feel it is when you start to know too much about your characters and about the book. This is the time to let go. And then to start erase backward, yes. And then there comes the period where there is no story. And I'm hungry. I'm like a hunter in this time because I know now, I have enough experience to know that the new idea can come up from everything, a face that I see, an anecdote that I hear, a conversation that I eavesdrop on the street.
You mean the idea for a new book?
The idea for a new book, yes. And this keeps me very alert when I don't have.
What do you do? You spoke a lot about the feeling, of preferring books that feel as if they were inevitable, and of course I prefer it too. But I also know very much what it is to be in a period where I lose that urgency. I can't find it, and it can become desperate. The search for it, and. You jokingly said when I told you that when we were eating, you said, so don't write then. And I think it's too easy. It's not, because I know that's not your answer to yourself. So I'm just curious, is it the case that the next book comes always easily to you and it's as urgent as the other? Or do you go through these periods where you're searching for it and you don't find it? And what do you do?
I search, not always in the beginning. I know it's inevitable. But the fact that I'm attracted to this idea, it says something to me. And I go there until I reach this layer of inevitability, of understanding why this book is so relevant for me and even crucial for me. And, there is always this danger that you turn from a writer, a natural writer, to a professional writer. And we all know, in a certain level, we all know how to write stories. I think one thing that this book taught me was that, it tells about an attempt to go from here to there, to get as far as possible to the point where the living can still touch the dead, and to return back from it. This was also very important. It's this very delicate balance of how to remember without dying of it and how to forget without killing. This was what the book tried to teach me. But it taught me another thing, and this is the fact that even though man lives on Earth for 2-3 million years, nobody really knows what happens in afterlife. Nobody knows. You know it. But I think I learned something that there is one way through which we can really scratch a little the exterior hermetic cover of over there. And this is the way of art, of writing prose or poetry or theater or music or painting. This is the only way for me as a non-believer that I can be in this place where life and death merge with the ultimate intensity of life in this place of the contact.
Maybe that's what you meant by the memory of the future. Then. Yeah. I think we should stop there.
Thank you, Nicole, very much.
Thank you so much.